But it's like you're not listening to at least the last part of their point. And the whole time they were talking, you were thinking about what you were going to say. You weren't actually going to be addressing their point.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that whole time you were talking, I was thinking about my next point, which is that maybe the Do Less podcast should start its own religion where we say check your bias instead of check your privilege.
And welcome back to the Do Less podcast. Jeff, John, and Brendan. So today we're going to be talking about censorship versus free speech and what's been in the news lately. This past week we had the march on the Capitol building by the right-wing Trump supporters, which is definitely a day that'll go down in history. And Trump was recently banned from Twitter this week as well. It's a pretty interesting story. Do you guys want to have some opening remarks, or I can open up with a few thoughts of my own?
Why don't you open us up?
Sure. So before you guys dive in, I'll just give you a little bit of what my perspective is on, whether or not these big social media companies should have the ability to ban people or silence certain points of views. I think you guys might agree with some, but not all of this. So generally, I think these big companies like Twitter are private companies, right? So the government shouldn't be telling them what to do. So they should have the right to decide who uses their platform and how, and therefore should have the right to ban people or mark certain tweets as fake news if that's what they decide to do. And obviously that's what they've been doing. That said, I don't think it's a great business decision for them to get in the business of being the arbiters of truth and deciding who gets to say what. But it's a little bit too late for that. So now that they've started down that road, and I think it could be interesting for us to talk about how in the modern day era the way for people to get their voices out there is through these social media apps. It's the only way to speak to millions of people at one time. And so when you have those platforms taken away from you, as Trump did this week, you are either then forced to use other applications that are generally have less users, or you can't go stand on your soapbox on the street corner and talk to a million people, right? So I think getting in the business of deciding who gets to say what is just going to lead to a little bit of further division between people's points of views when you're forcing people to a different app. Like Parler is the example where right-wing people are forced to go, speak their points of view, where they're now going to places that are even worse echo chambers than the typical social media places are, and they're not, getting a full perspective and seeing the left point of views on apps like Parler and other places are getting forced to go to. So I think it's bad news all around. I don't know what the answer is. Like I said, these companies should have the right to ban people, but it's pretty tough to determine, if and when they should do that. What do you guys think about that?
So you said it was a bad business decision. I would go as far as to say it's a bad civil decision in terms of what this is, what I consider this to be, and what this pretty fairly could be considered as by most of the people affected by the ban, in terms of wanting to hear what Trump says, like Trump supporters, I'm trying to say. They are all going to assume that this is an attack. This is quite literally the first step of an attack on a certain people is to destroy their means of communication with each other. So once you've done that, are you guys hearing a complete rushing in the background? Do you hear that?
Sounds good to hear.
Oh, okay. It's just when I was talking. It's going to be considered an attack, and so what do you do when you get attacked? You're going to defend yourself, and you're going to feel justified in defending yourself, however you deem necessary. Retaliation is what Trump supporters are going to determine in the coming days and weeks. But I wouldn't say anything less than that was a full-on attack of Trump supporters.
I feel like attack is a strong word, but I agree with you that this is essentially, from what we've seen, been an attempt to completely silence Donald Trump. It's not just like Twitter is like saying Donald Trump isn't subscribing to our terms and conditions, and so we're banning him off Twitter, and it's just this isolated company because Trump said he's going to move to Parler, and then Amazon Web Services said they're not going to host Parler on their platform. And then Apple said they take Parler off their web store, which their app store, which they haven't done yet, but they said they would, or threatened to. So you kind of have all these big companies working together to make sure he's got nowhere to go. So we're moving out of sort of just a single company's decision into this more like cartel-like moving in lockstep decision making with these companies where, you know, they all work together so closely that if, let's say, Amazon Web Services stops hosting someone, then, you know, it's much harder for that application to exist. Or if if everyone together is banning you from getting access, it's much more difficult for you to exist. But even still, even with all these big tech companies coming together, I still think they all have every right to do this. So I don't like it. It kind of creeps me out, in all honesty, that they're all just working together like this. But I don't see this as any. I subscribe to like the non-aggression principle, which is basically the core tenet of libertarianism, which is basically laws and the government is there to make sure people don't aggress on other people. And I think if you built the app, you own the servers, all this is private property, you can decide who gets to participate with your business and who doesn't. And so this is all falling under freedom of association as far as I'm concerned. And because that's the case, I don't think they're doing anything morally wrong by doing this. I just would agree. I don't think this is a good business decision because about half the country.
You don't think it's morally wrong?
No, I don't think it is.
I think you should bifurcate that, because I think I see what you're saying. Like, it's not morally wrong to choose who's on your platform and choose who's allowed to say what. But I think it's morally wrong to choose to enforce your rules on one side and not on the other side. I think that's not morally right.
Yeah, but the problem is I don't think they see it that way. I think they truly believe they're being fair. That's the thing. It's like I don't think behind closed doors they sit down and go, how do we stop these Republicans? I think they really do like drink the Kool-Aid in terms of Trump is an existential threat to America. This is like I think they truly probably do believe that.
Like Cartman thinks he's telling the truth because he's such a liar that his lies actually internalize. And so when he's telling a lie, he's actually telling the truth, but it's a lie that he made up. But to him, it's the truth.
Yeah, I mean, I think they actually do believe this. And then if we were to come in to say, oh, you're not... I don't think anyone here would advocate the government stepping in. But the problem is, once we start saying this is immoral, I know we don't advocate for legislating around morality, but it concerns me that if the rhetoric amps up to this is immoral, they shouldn't be doing this, there's going to be, because there's already, I see all over Twitter, conservatives.
Well, I think you could make a difference. It's saying it's immoral doesn't mean you're saying you shouldn't be doing this. People can make their own choices, but to say something's immoral doesn't. It's not to say you're not allowed to do it. It's just to say that it's the wrong thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. But I wouldn't go so far to call it immoral. I think it's not healthy for um, our social fabric. But I think our social fabric is already sort of falling apart. And it seems like if these companies keep doing these sorts of things, they're basically alienating potentially half their consumer base. And if all these companies go, you know, you did business with this notorious Trump supporter, so I'm not doing business with you. If lots and lots of businesses start doing that, we're essentially going to bifurcate into two economies. There's going to be an economy for people who are like, don't want to touch anything to do with Trump, and an economy of people who either don't care or, are Trump supporters. And so I think this is terrible for the social fabric because if we're not doing trade with one another, it's very easy for us to start to view each other as the other side, like different. I think separating our government is less hostile than this. If you don't do trade with people, that's much more alienating than just saying we'll govern each other differently, I feel. Because if you're not willing to trade with someone, do business with someone, you're basically saying you are so evil, we can't even do something that's in both of our best interests, which is,
Right.
I think, a very dark place to take this.
Yeah. And I'll just say one more thing. So on the immorality of it, I would actually say the more egregious example of pretty much the same thing from Twitter was back before the election when the Hunter Biden story broke, and they just completely censored that story. They would not let it run on their website or even be shared among their direct messages on their website. I think that was actually an example of something that they did out of the complete purpose to change the election results. Like they didn't want something that was going to negatively affect Biden to come out the week before the election. So I think they did that specifically in mind with the election in mind. Whereas this, you could say it's less of a politically charged result driven kind of thing. So I would say that was the egregious example. And the fact that we didn't learn from that and we kind of just was like, oh, that was weird, but hopefully that never happens again. And then all of a sudden you get this and it's like, well, you knew what Twitter was going to do. They were going to do what they did before. Like you've already had the example that they were going to do this. So that was the example we should have been throwing up the red flag before we let Twitter run rampant.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think something that's a useful thought experiment for people, especially any Democratic left wing person listening to this. To clarify, I hate Trump and everything he says and pretends to stand for, and yet I think it's a very slippery slope to shut down his Twitter account and the things he's saying and filter stories like the Hunter Biden story, like you just said. So I think what's an interesting thought experiment is to imagine the next George Washington, someone who's positive and great for our society in theory, but is would be required to be anti-establishment and kind of overthrow the government, or obviously the things George Washington would have been saying 300 years ago would be issues that would incite violence, right? Obviously he started a war, so you can imagine if a politician like that came along today, he would very likely be considered a domestic terrorist, or would be deplatformed pretty quickly, and might not be able to would pretty quickly not be able to tear down an establishment if social media companies are silencing that person's voice, and the government's obviously going to be demonizing that person if they're anti-government. So it's hard
that's
to
a good
imagine how
point.
that happens.
That's a good point. You can just imagine just imagine the British colonial argument. It's like, that guy George Washington, he doesn't want our king's rule over there, and he
Right.
wants to subject his bad policies on the people over there to a negative effect to those people. He doesn't care about those people. He's like a Nazi. Well, obviously they wouldn't say Nazi, but he's like as bad as, you know. So do a little time warp thought experiment. But they'd be like, that guy that's doing that is all a lot like Hitler, who is yet to be born or do anything bad. But in our time
Even
warp
before
thought
Hitler,
experiment.
we compared everyone to Hitler.
Right.
No, but yeah, I think that's a good point. But what's interesting about that point is how many people today, like what percent of Americans do you think would say the American Revolution was a good thing? I don't know, and I'm not going to put a percentage, but I bet it's not as high as it used to be.
Really?
You think so?
I bet it's 99%.
You think so? I don't know.
I do.
I
was
think
gonna
there's
say
a lot of
99.
people actually who don't really like what America stands for, and so to say, oh well, if we had the next George Washington come along, they're like, oh, it would have been better if like that guy never had a chance. I don't know. Maybe that's completely false because I have nothing to support what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But I think there is more and more people out there in America who generally don't really believe in the American experiment so much.
I think that's probably true, and like you said, I think it's declining. But it's pretty impossible to imagine the counterfactual. You know how history would have proceeded if that didn't happen, if the American Revolution didn't happen. So impossible to say whether it'd be better or worse.
See,
Sure.
Jeff, I don't get that kind of perspective, because I think that, well, I mean, it's kind of one thing to say that people are going against their public school government programming to learn that the Revolutionary War was like some fairy tale, like, beautiful thing. Like, it's kind of hard to unlearn that for people. So even if they are critically thinking about the U.S., I don't think that their critical thinking is strong enough to unlearn what they learned about how great the Revolutionary War is. I think my perspective is of that opinion that they have is like more, America was great in its foundation, great in its promulgation, but now it's being bastardized, and so we need to recorrect the ship. We're the champions of that. Like, they're saying like, we need to censor Trump because we need to keep the spirit of America alive. Back to our roots from the Revolutionary War. Like that, to them, that's all in the same sentence almost.
So you need to make it great again, is what you're saying.
Well, that's a really good point. And I actually, now that you mention it, I would agree with that. I would say, I think everyone thinks they're the ones being oppressed upon, and that they're sort of the revolutionaries, and that they're standing up to the powers that be.
Right.
And that's pretty hilarious, because if we're all the ones being oppressed, who's the real oppressor, right? So if you ask a Trump supporter, they'd tell you, this PC culture, the media, Hollywood, academia, even public schools maybe, they would say they're all against Trumpism. They're against us. We're being oppressed. And then I would say sort of the left would tell you the exact opposite. They said, Trump rose to power. They're oppressing us because what they're putting this guy at the top position of office. So like, this is a threat to our existence. So I'd say you have two sides of the argument, both arguing that the other side is imposing on them. And there's no way to establish who is really the imposer and who is the imposed upon.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Just two sides battling each other, but then yeah, I think that brings up the point that the far right people that are storming the Capitol building, are the same people that are, like QAnon theorists and things like that, right? Obviously, some of that's like more extreme examples, but those people believe in a globalist conspiracy to take over the world and they're all pedophiles and things like that, right? But anytime big tech companies are coming together to, not allow the use of the Parler app, for example, that is all just legitimizing these theories in their minds. And they're like, hey, look, like Twitter banned the president of the United States because he was saying the things that I believe. And that is pretty extreme, and that like looks like pretty good evidence of all the shit they believe in. Right?
Yeah, that's a great point, because that is, if I believe there was a global conspiracy, which I don't, but if I did believe that, I'd be like feeling justified right now. I'd be look,
absolutely. This would be the evidence in their minds, and it's definitely how they're viewing it.
Right.
Yeah, and that goes back to what I was saying in the beginning. Like, so maybe attack is too strong of a word, but to those people, it's not. Like, that's what it is. Right. It's absolutely the attack of this evil force that is globalist in nature or whatever, some kind of evil, and it's coming for them, starting with their leader, their fearless leader, Trump, right. who by the way will sell them down the river for 5 cents and a stick of gum, right? Yeah. Like his concession speech was, man. He's like, yeah, those people should be locked up. He didn't even have anything to say about, like, thank you for supporting me, anything.
Yeah, it was immediately just trying to distance himself from the situation. So, yeah, I mean, for as much as, like, people love Trump, I don't see any reciprocation there as far as I'm concerned.
No.
Put your faith in Jeff Deist and Bob Murphy.
Yeah. Put your faith and do less. We'll take care of you.
Yeah.
All right. So what do you guys think? These big social media
the greatest podcast ever.
Making podcasts great again. What do you guys think these Twitter and similar companies should be doing in terms of limitations of free speech? It seems like there's some required minimum, right? Where, we always talk about free speech as if it's like a constitutional right to say anything, but obviously there's limitations on that. I can't go around like making bomb threats and encouraging terrorism. So I think there's some requirement for these social media apps to limit what's what they're propagating. And so if I was starting like a domestic terrorist coup on Twitter, they probably should stop that, right? They probably should ban me, I would think, right? Or if I was telling people to blow up schools, they should probably do something about that, right? They should probably ban me. But at that point, they're drawing a line in the sand somewhere. And there's certain things they're deciding to ban and things that they're not. So how do you guys think they should consider that?
So I think the solution is competition. Either Twitter can adopt these policies or someone else can, because I think there's actually a better model for a lot of these big tech companies. And I think just because they were sort of the first most valuable products on the market, they've built a lot of network effect that keeps them being on top and makes it difficult to compete with them. But I think there could be better models out there. For example, in Twitter, to me, they've opened a can of worms on themselves in which they're becoming the moderators of their platform, in which there's millions of users, which is basically an impossible task. Anything that involves judgment for that many users is just an impossible task. So I think they've opened up a can of worms on themselves by even attempting to do this. I think you more so could have maybe some sort of decentralized platform where you don't really store all the data. It's just, it's publicly displayed, but the data gets encrypted and just put into a server somewhere. And there's no backdoors, moderators, admins, or anything of that sort. And so it's just sort of free reign. And then you build rules into the software where basically if certain things get reported enough times, you just make some rule set to automatically hide this content, but if people want to see it, they can view it, or it gets deleted, depending on what it is. And then maybe even a platform where you require like identification of some kind, so that it's all just real people. I mean, you don't necessarily have to sign up for this, but it could be an interesting idea, so that there's no bots and everyone can only have one account and it's their actual name, so that you don't sort of have these anonymous trolls, and it's really more of like a town square, like people sort of refer to Twitter as. And that way, if you're actually threatening people, then maybe we can deal with that in real life according to your identity. Because I don't know, I think I know people get heated on the internet, but as soon as you start like death threats, like you need a little more emotional maturity, because that's just not okay.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, in this situation, I'm even inclined to like, let's even go as far as to say like, this is the best move by Twitter and all these companies. Like, let's say we're not even privy to some conversations, which I'm likely to believe that probably did happen, of like actual riot organization and like logistic planning and stuff. This is what we're gonna do. This is how we're gonna, if there are some people at Twitter that are privy to that and they want to shut that down, then maybe they're actually doing good by doing such a strong arm action and removing all these accounts from their platform. I just almost wish though, like, so let's lend them that. Let's believe that that's what's going on. It's just hard for me, and I know it's hard for a lot of people who don't have memory loss beyond 6 months ago to remember seeing this talking head, that talking head, this politician, that famous athlete. Oh, yeah, a couple buildings got burned down, but it's because we're serious, is what they said on Twitter. So it's just like, you got to be like, okay, Twitter, you're doing a good thing, but you got to be more consistent. So, but Jeff, what you're saying with the competition is what solves it. That's what letting someone sweep in and get the market share is what is the most effective way to teach a corporation a lesson.
Yeah, I do think there's something to be said about challenges, impediments to competition when it comes to social media, just because the required user base to be effective and competitive is pretty tough hurdle to get over and get any inertia.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. So here's actually another solution I just came up with: make the government less powerful. There's less of a carrot at the end of the stick, to fight over. If controlling the power allows you to do what? Put in someone that controls the military, which, isn't one, hopefully there's not a lot of wars, or hopefully there's less that the military, like the commander in chief, even needs to do day to day. So what do we argue about day to day? It becomes less of this political power grab, that exists on social media, and what these social media companies are able to play referee on. And it just becomes like, oh, it's not even worth the conversation because there's no power to grab.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, because whenever you're trying to solve any problem, you always want to ask yourself, okay, what's the root cause? Because if you're just solving problems that are symptoms of another problem, it's like just putting a Band-Aid on a wound. It doesn't necessarily solve the problem. And the question is, why are we so divided as a country? And the answer is because people have an existential meltdown anytime their candidate's not in office. So if it's this important to have your guy at the top thing, that's kind of the root problem here. And we're so divided because half of the country feels like they're under tyrannical rule every 4 years or every 8 years. And if we didn't feel that way, all this divisiveness, all this anger and violence wouldn't be leaking out into other aspects of our society. And if we're just saying, okay, how do we fix Twitter? How do, there's sense, it's like, well, what if we just weren't so politically divided as a nation? maybe we wouldn't even be having this conversation.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point.
Last illustrative example, there was a woman that was running for representative of Florida. I believe it was a Congress in Florida. Her name is Laura Loomer, and she was banned from everything, like what Trump got banned from on Friday and more, including like 5 of her 6 bank accounts. So she wasn't allowed to bank like freely just because of the things she said. She's very far right, actually kind of crazy. I'm not a big fan, but but the example would be like these banks have more of a financial incentive to shunt a congresswoman's campaign than in a society where if there wasn't that much power, the financial incentive would actually be to bank with this with this woman. Like the financial gain that could be had from allowing this woman to bank with your bank should could and should be larger than the financial incentive that you have from having the chance to shunt her campaign and control the political environment.
Yeah, I think that point can't be overstated, right? So we have all these big giant corporations, which for the longest time, all we ever talked about is how they're greedy and all they care about is profits. That's been the thing we've all said about corporations. And so now that you have these entities, which we all say are only care about profits, they're just greedy, that's all that matters, doing things that on the surface seem to be against their financial interests. They're banning users, blocking customers, segmenting their market, potentially alienating entire swaths of their user base. That would seem to be against their financial interests. But if they truly still are acting in their, let's say, long-term financial interests, what does that mean for our government? What does that mean for our society? That truly the most profitable thing to do is to isolate yourself into this echo chamber of thinking and not let any other people access any of your services.
Yeah, it's a good point. I do think there's a social aspect to it, right? Which has financial incentives attached to it, such that these companies, I think these banks, I don't know the specific story of this congresswoman, but these banks are choosing not to do business with someone because other people that they are hoping to get business from may not want to use their services because they are offering services to someone they don't like, and so it's kind of like people that have the stain of Trump on them, right? Other people don't want to do business with them because they then won't get business from all these other people that hate Trump, right? So they still could be financially incentivized not to do business with someone.
Right. That's kind of what I'm concerned about, is that it's becoming profitable to be isolationist. I think this isn't necessarily a problem for our government to solve, because it's probably our government that pitted us against each other so much in the first place. So, I mean, we're kind of in a tough situation here. It's hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel, honestly.
Yeah. I would agree. We started down a slippery slope I don't see a great outcome in any hypothetical scenario.
Let me pose a question to you both. What do you think could bring us together as a country, if at all? Or do you think it's just kind of that ship has sailed and we're just never going to get along?
Unfortunately, I have one answer that's unfortunate, but I'll let you start, John.
Bombing children in Yemen.
Oh my God.
It's messed up. I think realistically, though, I do think one thing that's proven to bring people together is can oftentimes a common enemy in hardship. So realistically, obviously, I don't think this would be a good thing for the world, but I think foreign war would be something that would actually bring us together. Like if there's World War III.
I wasn't joking. Like it was. Like that's seriously what the foreign enemy is. What now? Some people say the coronavirus was the foreign enemy that was required to bring us together, but that actually didn't work. So maybe that's not even strong enough to bring us together. I think that, yeah, I don't think that there is anything. Do you think there is, Jeff?
No, honestly, I think a lot of people view people I'm close with, family, friends, they'll view like Trump supporters as sort of their enemy. They don't view them as their countrymen. And
Right.
I know Trump supporters who basically feel like all liberals are just tyrants who want to control them. And so it's not everybody. Obviously, us three are sitting here and we're not particularly emotionally charged about politics. We care about it, but it's not, I don't think any of us have ever lost a friend over politics. And so, you know, there's much more people out there like us, but there is a sizable amount of people who really view other citizens as their enemy.
Yeah, I just saw a video at the last Wednesday, the 6th, of it was a reporter that was obviously a leftist who was walking up to someone. While he was walking up, he was saying, "These are a bunch of clowns. Let's talk to one now." And then he put his microphone out. What do you think of Trump? And the guy's like, "Oh, greatest president." He was like tearing up. He's like, "He's gonna save us. Like he's gonna do it." And then the guys just listened to him, and he walks away. And he's like, "There you have it." Like, just the most disrespectful. Like it's
Yeah.
funny, but it's like
No, yeah.
Right.
It's like
That
that,
guy is
person
coming
was
from a
crying his
place-
heart out, yeah.
that kind. This is one person is expressing his deep like salvation. His deep like happiness, what brings him happiness, what brings him optimism, and the other guy is using it to completely disrespect him and make fun of him on a very large platform. This is on, this was getting millions of views. So it's just like these are people that are interested in respecting each other. They're
Right.
interested in
Agreed.
demonizing each other. So it's like, at least have the respect to just have a divorce. Say, we're
Yeah,
done
but-
here. We're done here. I'm not going to put you through any more pain, but you can't put me through any pain.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. I think to your point, no matter how much you disagree, we need to be able to have conversations and respect people's opinions and try to see where they're coming from. Like you
Yeah.
can imagine another scenario where someone's religious, like a Buddhist or something that you're not, and say like, yeah, I found like salvation through like this practice, and it really like changed my life for the better. And then you turn to Jeff and say, listen to that clown. Like,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
even if it's not something you agree with, you can't. It doesn't help to talk to or about people that way.
Yeah, I was literally right about to bring up religion as an example. And I was going to say, there's all these different religions out there. And if we tried to force one religion rule upon the rest of us, can you imagine how divided we'd
Right.
be?
Right.
Like, we would be at each other's throats. If it was Christian president one year, Islam president the next year, like, or, whatever, like, we'd be completely at each other's throats. We'd probably be killing each other already. So I think our politics and our culture has become so different, so spread, so far apart, that you can almost treat it like religion at this point, where we need to be able to have, I guess, some sort of separation where, one culture has its form of governance and the other culture has its form of governance, and they don't agree with each other, but neither one is trying to conquer the other and impose, we're not trying to do the Crusades again, hopefully anytime soon, just agree to disagree, essentially.
Yeah, it's crazy how eerily similar political language is mirroring religious language,
Totally agree.
such as what we saw on Wednesday, when we saw, oh, this is a whatever they called it, this like a shrine. I don't think they called it a shrine. What did they say? It was like when they reached the Capitol, they're like, this is a sanctimonious place, or whatever. It's
I don't
like,
know, the sacred
Yeah.
institution.
sacred, sacred institution. It's just like, and even back in the BLM riots, it was like, oh, like people need to repent for their sins. I mean, they didn't say that, but it was essentially a movement to say, hey, everybody, this is a call for you to recognize your sins, and through this way, repent, kind of, you know what I mean? Like, it's just very similar to like religion in that way, in that regard.
Yeah. It's like comparing the phrase check your privilege to like repent for your sins.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
The sins of your forefathers. Which-
Original sin, yeah.
Yeah, which like I think that's something people, you know, I think that's worth talking about is the idea that, you know, white cis males like ourselves, you know, are born with the benefit, which is absolutely true and is the case of, you know, white privilege that makes our lives easier, right? That's definitely a real thing, and you know, the two sides are telling each other like, hey, like, you know, the left is saying to the right, you're born with this privilege, and the people on the right are saying, I don't feel that privilege, right? Because it's,
Right.
like you've pointed out in the past, a lot of these people are in rural areas where they only see other white people, and you know, their middle class livelihoods have been deteriorating for many years now, and when they're told that they're privileged and fortunate, they don't feel that that's the case.
Right, especially when it like comes from kind of Ivy League kids who are saying to someone who didn't even go to college, you know, you're privileged. It just, I don't think that's gonna work. You know, I don't think that's gonna ring harmoniously with that individual. You know, so
Right.
if you want to like reach people, I think we don't have empathy for one another. You know, I think if you asked either side to put yourself in their shoes, I don't think they could do it. I think they would be so repulsed of the idea of imagining their opposition's humanity. It would just cause too much cognitive dissonance. I don't even think they can empathize at this point.
Yeah, like you ask someone, it's like, what is that other person arguing? And they're just like, well, something stupid, like, just complete, and then just like throw out a complete straw man. It's like, oh, okay, so why are you arguing with them if they're not, you know, like, why are you trying to appeal to their logic when they're not exhibiting logic to you? You know, it's just you're wasting your breath at that point. That's one thing that did we address this on our logic episode? It's just like when you're engaging with someone in an argument, which is to say you're engaged with it in a logical discourse, it's like if you're not starting from a basis of logic, it's like you're wasting your time. Like you're not,
Right.
You're just having a fight. You're just wasting your breath.
Yeah, that's true. If you're starting with emotion as your start point, you're not going to get anywhere with that discussion. So you might as well like punch each other in the face because you're not.
And here's the thing. I consider myself someone who very strongly emphasizes that in my life. Like, make sure that you're not just arguing with someone. Make sure you're appealing to their logic, understanding what they're saying. Give them credit for having an argument. Give them credit for believing what they're saying. You know, I believe those so strongly, and I feel myself like the day after, I'm like, I don't know why I said that to them. I don't think I was going to change their mind at that point. I said it out of emotion. Like, I can even
Right.
feel myself. Like, even when you know it's something that people do, you can't stop yourself. Like, it's just, we're too strong. Like, we're just too strong-willed. Like, oh, I just wanted to say that, you know, I just wanted to say it out of emotion. So it's just like, you got to constantly be checking yourself, and that's a hard thing because that takes time. Like, if you're in a conversation and someone says something to you and you say, let me think about that. Well, they say, okay, well then I beat you. You know, I'm a better debater than you. And it's just like, well, what we should see in conversations is someone says something, the other person said, you know, okay, let me think about that. You know, take some time. I listened to a podcast. They said the average response time after someone finishes talking in a conversation is like It's like less than 5 seconds.
That's a good point,
like,
John.
yeah, right. Oh, and
That's a good point. I think people actually wait too long.
You're right. But it's like you're not listening to at least the last part of their point. You know, and the whole time they were talking, you were thinking about what you were going to say. You weren't actually going to be addressing their point.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that whole time you were talking, I was thinking about my next point, which is that maybe the Do Less podcast should start its own religion where we say check your bias instead of check your privilege. And then that way everyone remembers to check their bias.
That's interesting, Jeff. Let me think about that. I think I'm biased because I'm a member of Do Less podcast, so I can't in good faith opine.
Yeah. Do you guys?
We'll have a Twitter poll if we're not censored.
If we're not censored. Yeah.
You guys decide.
Yeah. Anything else you guys want? I feel like we've strayed pretty far from the subject of censorship, but
that's fair.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to touch on that topic that we haven't said already?
I think it's fair that we did deviate so far from censorship because I honestly don't think. Well, I wouldn't even define what has happened as censorship. To me, censorship is government silencing. It actually involves force. I don't think like private people can censor other people. I don't believe that as the case. And so, again, I think the reason we deviated so far is because this really is, I think, just a symptom bubbling up from the underlying culture divide that we have in this country. And so that we took it to that place, I think, is reasonable. And another point I wanted to make about arguing with someone, right?
Well, could I just, one thing is I agree with that. I do think that the hybrid nature of our private corporations, how closely tied cell phone providers are to utilities and how utilities are government subsidized, stuff like that. It's like, okay, once you get in that realm, it's like, if a cell phone company starts not letting someone use this cell phone, it's like that censorship, even though that's a private company. Stuff like that, I would say, so Twitter, it's probably even further away from that, but the line of censorship, I think, will be a little muddied in this scenario.
Yeah, that's a good point because it is sort of a gray area, right? So let's say government has like barriers to entry for competition. If they're using their force to prevent competitors from entering the market, it doesn't matter if Twitter is completely private because if the government won't let anyone else enter the game, it's essentially government censorship. I don't think that's what we're looking at quite yet, but it's entirely possible that we could head there. So, I think that's a valid point, John.
Sorry, what were you? And then you were going to go on to say.
So, I mean, I think a thing that can help with division is if you're arguing with someone, like you said, don't start from a place of emotion. Try to start from a place of, putting yourself in their shoes and understanding their argument. And we shouldn't look at arguments. I know a lot of people who view even just very civil discourse as sort of an attack on each other. Like it is this animosity, even just disagreeing with one another. And it really doesn't have to be that way. If you disagree with someone, you can have a discussion with them that can be mutually beneficial, right? It doesn't have to be dominating your opponent and winning the argument and they agree with you now. Like that doesn't have to be the point of a discussion. If both people walk away with a better understanding of where the other person's coming from, that's a mutually beneficial thing, and it's like net positive. Neither one walked away worse, they both walked away better.
Yeah, that, and going back to that podcast I mentioned earlier about conversations, they're just saying like how important it is to enter a conversation with the idea that you can learn something.
Right.
Rather than what we do is we go in, we're trying to teach someone or trying to change their mind. But if we go in and we think, how can I learn? Let me learn at least one thing from this person that I otherwise didn't think about.
Totally. I think that's really important. And can't be stressed enough. I think civil discourse is one of the only answers. And like we've mentioned, going in and thinking about what your own biases are when starting conversations and being there to listen is the only way to ever heal the divide that we have right now. And I think it's unlikely, but I think maybe the only answer to what could bring us together is a cultural shift where that becomes, considered cool or moral to enter conversations that way, and for people to be just generally accepting of people with very opposing views. I don't think we're gonna go there, but
we're not helping because we're the lamest people that you guys are gonna ever see, and we're trying to do it. So we are creating the opposite of it. A good example.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the answer is just to agree to disagree. Sometimes that's the best way to get out of an argument with someone when it's getting too heated. You just say, agree to disagree if it's getting too charged, and you go your separate ways. And it could be the case that we're at that point where it's time to agree to disagree. I hope it's not, because the more we cooperate as humans, the better off we are, because I see the human brain as the most valuable resource there is, and the more we can work together and unleash the potential of a human mind, the better we're all going to be. So I hope it doesn't come to this point, but it's better than us killing each other. So
yeah,
because the human brain comes up with all sorts of ways to do that. Very creative in that department.
That is true. So do you guys think, like, post Biden inauguration, Twitter ever opens up Trump's Twitter again, or do you think it's a permanent ban and that becomes a more commonplace thing, or do you think this is
Alex Jones? It's just going the way of Alex Jones.
Yeah, I think he'll start his own private website or whatever with his own servers and just have his own audience, just like Alex Jones. And Alex Jones doesn't even have any corporate sponsors. He sponsors his own podcast. Like Trump could do the same thing, or whatever. Pushes hotels. I don't know.
I actually got kind of like a shiver down my spine when he was starting to get reprimanded by the media and stuff, and then he came out with that concession video. I'm like, what kind of shady dark force sat him down and was like, listen, here's what's going to happen, otherwise you are going to face some serious penalties and serious consequences. And he was just like, all right, yep, I concede, unless that was a deep fake. I don't know, I'm just saying.
It could have been his own legal team that told him, yeah, this is for your own good.
Yeah, could be. It's kind of scary to me, though.
It's still scary. What's scarier, if it is a deep fake, what's scarier? The fact that they would attempt that, or the fact that, what was the other thing?
I don't think you could get anyone to fake Trump's physique.
Yeah, I had a weird.
It's iconic.
I had a weird.
Can't fake that.
Duopoly kind of thing, but I lost it. Never mind.
I don't know. I think that's all I have for the topic, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great.
I did have one other thing. This is probably more relevant way back, so maybe I'll splice it in, or maybe I'll just say it. But the idea of how, when I was saying how we should have heeded the warning before the election with Hunter Biden censoring, it kind of reminds me of, and how we didn't do anything. It kind of reminds me of another topic we talk a lot about, which is monetary policy, of how our whole system is set up to basically be like, everything's going to be fine as long as no existential threat such as a pandemic happens. Everyone is fine with this monetary policy where no one needs any savings and the interest rate can be zero, and where everyone's living hand to mouth. That's fine for, it's as long as you can keep this picture of economic prosperity going. But then as soon as something interrupts that, then it all cascades in and upon itself. Just like with this social media, I would say the analog is, it's all fine as long as everyone's is all confining within the box of allowable opinion. But as soon as someone breaks that, it's just oh, we recognize now that it was very it was very irresponsible to put all our faith in this one private company, Twitter, that they're going to be the best arbiter of information. It's like, oh wow, we just like it makes you like wake up and say like, okay, no, we gotta rethink. There's so many faults and there's so many points of failure that we gotta rethink about that. So I kind of see an analog there.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is we don't put all our eggs in one basket and say
Right.
to these companies, you're the public square, but the government will, regulate it and whatever else. Like we need to not have all our eggs in one basket so that if anyone goes too far, we can just hop on to the next thing just like that. I mean, like, I don't think we'd be sitting down and having a conversation about MySpace's terms and conditions. So like that's because the market can improve and fix those problems.
Little known fun facts: MySpace is fully okay with Nazis. That's how they all get Nazi. All right.
All right.
Anything else?
I think we teased the concept of secession, so stay tuned to Do Less because we may be having a full-on debate with some.
We will be. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Jack and Henry.
We will pwn them with facts and logic until they submit to our way of thinking. So it's going to be pretty sick.
Oh yeah, all that stuff you're saying about respectable disagreements and logical arguments. It's like, no, that's going out the window.
Going out the window. That'll be an emotionally charged conversation.
Ad hominems. So if you're listening, we're coming for you. All right.
Well, I'm excited for that. So
All right.
tune in next time.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Talk to you later.